Okay, so welcome to the React tooling lesson. This is again just a short lesson because we went through this Friday. But let's talk about the couple things we're going to cover. We're going to cover using create React app to boilerplate a React application, and then we'll talk about using prop types and what type checking is and how it can help us and why we even do this extra step in our development process. So create React app is a library or is a tool that the Facebook team has given us to boilerplate a React application. So before create React app, we basically React devs had to set up everything, all the boilerplate code on our own. Boilerplate just means like, what is the minimum file structure that you need to start your application? So every single React application, or most React applications that you build, kind of have the same structure, file structure, and setup before you actually start building your application. And that's what the boilerplate is. So some people will build their own boilerplates if they know that they always want a certain package, or if they want everything set up a certain way for every single application that they build, they'll kind of make their own boilerplate stuff. So this is just a buzzword that you'll hear in the JavaScript world, is having a boilerplate package that helps you to get into your application a lot quicker rather than spending a lot of time on the setup. So unfortunately, setting up a React app is pretty tedious, and luckily we have this awesome tool called Create React App. So it's pretty simple. We have given you instructions on how to use Create React App 2.0, which came out about 6 weeks ago. So it was just barely released. So this is how you can use Create React App 2.0. So let's go through the process, and we will create a new application, and then we'll take a look at what this gives us. Gotta get to my right. Let's go into Lambda. We'll just start one right here. Okay, so to use Create React App, we're going to run this command. Yarn gives us the create command, so we can run the command yarn create, and then we have to tell yarn what we're creating. So we're creating a React app called my app. And then it will go through that process and install all the things, get us all of our packages that we need for our boilerplate code, 24,000 of them. Cool. And then it tells us what we can do with this React application. So we have to cd into our app. So we can see my app right there. So we cd into that, and then we can run yarn start to start up our development server. And then there's a couple other tools that we can do. Yarn build helps us bundle our app into static files for production. Yarn test if you are testing, if you have tests for your app, and then yarn eject that basically takes down what the build that you have, and yeah, be careful with that one. You probably won't ever use this, honestly. Okay, so those are kind of the main commands that we can use inside this Create React App application. So we're going to go into my app, and then let's open it up in Visual Studio here. Dose. Oh, man. Oh, man. Why does it do that every time? Okay, that should do it. There we go. It's like Monday today, except it's Tuesday, but it's like Monday. Okay, so what does Create React App give us? This should look really familiar to you because this is very close to the setup that we get in Code Sandbox with a couple extra things. So we've got a README that explains all that you need to know for this boilerplate project that you created. We've got a package.json that gives us our dependencies. So we've got React, React DOM, and React scripts. And then this also gives us the scripts that we can run. So we saw these in the explanation. We got yarn start, yarn build, yarn test, and yarn eject. And then we don't really have to worry too much about the rest of this stuff. You are welcome to look into what some of these do on your own if you are curious about that. Then let's see, yarn lock is basically everything that was downloaded, all the dependencies that were downloaded for this project in the order that they were downloaded. So if you take this my app directory and you put it onto a server like Heroku or Netlify, or if you zip it up and send it to somebody else, and their computer, when they run yarn install, will look at this yarn.lock file, and it will download all the dependencies in the same order, the same versions, everything the exact same, because of this yarn.lock file. So this is basically why yarn was created, because running npm install didn't do this reliably. You couldn't put your project onto a server to host it somewhere and get it live into the universe, and have it reliably download the same exact packages in the same order, and it, in some cases would cause problems that you couldn't replicate in your development environment. So this is kind of the reason that we have yarn. npm has caught up, and now there's a npm.lock file that does the same thing. So yeah, just building things to push the entire industry forward, and everybody says, oh, that's a cool thing, why haven't we done that? And they catch up and then innovate and push the industry even more forward. So that's what this huge long file is for, just in case you were wondering. All right, a couple other things to note in here. So something that's a little bit different than our code sandbox file structure is that we have both an index.js and an app.js. So code sandbox combines these two. They put the app component inside index.js. So instead of importing it here, they would just write the class app inside index.js, which we've all seen as we've used Code Sandbox. But that's basically the biggest difference in the file structure between what we just created here using Create React App and what Code Sandbox creates using Create React App. And then, of course, since you have an app.js component file, they also add the app.css CSS file here. And then the last two things that we see are the service worker and tests. So generally, you don't need this service worker. A service worker basically lets you still run your application, or lets your users still run your application when they don't have internet, when they're offline. So this is used for a lot for applications, web apps. So you can build a web app that your phone can download and that kind of mocks a native mobile app. And this is outside of React Native. This is like just pure React web application. You could build a pure web application, not a React Native application, just a React application. Use service workers to let it run offline and run it. And then your phone would detect that you have this kind of setup going on and would allow you to download the web application as a native application onto your phone. So it's kind of cool. This is called progressive web apps. So service workers basically give us the ability to make progressive web apps out of our web applications. Again, that's another topic that you can study on your own if you'd like to learn more. I encourage you to learn a little bit about progressive web apps. It seems like right now that's kind of the way things are going. Google is building into Android the ability to give web applications like more of a native application feel. And it seems like they're spending a lot of resources on doing that. So this is going to be more and more of a thing in the coming future. So just a heads up on that. If I'm not concerned about running this as a progressive web application, I just delete this file here, move to trash, which means I have to come into my index.js and remove this file, import there, and then all of this stuff here. So this is a little bit of an explanation of what the service worker lets you do. Does have some pitfalls. You can learn more about it right there. Okay, so when we remove the service worker, we get to this point here, and this is where most of our React applications start, and what the index.js looks like. App.js, we start to bring in our router. We'll learn about that next week. Redux, this is where kind of those extra things happen, is inside app.js. Cool, and then you'll learn more about testing on your last week of backend, the backend class. So for now, I even delete this, but if you're going to be using tests, then keep that, and this is kind of a good starting point for testing. But for now, we'll move that to the trash, and yeah. Now we're pretty much at the same point. If we separate app.js and index.js, we're basically at the same point that we're at with Code Sandbox. So the last thing we want to do here is say yarn start, and this will open up the browser and a new tab and start up our project. Oh, we forgot one more service worker in .source index.js. Oh, I must not have saved that. Yeah. Save. Hot reloading happens, and there we go. Now we've got our application up and running. So you can see this looks exactly like our Create React app would look, with app as the main component and then everything inside there. Cool. I'm going to just check out Slack to see if we have a question. So one question did come up about NPM and Yarn. So with NPM and Yarn, they're not the same, let's see, npm yarn dev server is the same. Okay, so you can run into issues if you do something like yarn install and then try to do npm start. Whatever you do your install with, you have to stick with that that package the entire time. So yeah, I've seen this a little bit, and I'm aware of this, and that we really should take that over. Change that over to yarn, because we basically use yarn for everything. So I apologize about that, but yeah, ignore it. Use yarn if you can. And yeah, good questions. Okay, cool. So let's check out, keep typing. Let's check out now. Let's talk about prop types. All right, so prop types are a system. Oh, I was going to mention this. If you use yarn create like this to create a React application, if you use create React app 2.0, these are potential errors. So if you see this, create React app requires Node 8 or higher, you're not using a compatible version of Node, and here's the instructions to fix it. If you get the yarn start error, so after you have generated your React app and you're trying to run it, and you get this page, you should follow all the steps to fix it. But for a quick fix, follow these instructions here. Cool. Okay. Past this, and we are at learn to describe and be able to use prop types to type check specific data. So what does type checking mean? Do you guys know what type checking is? Good. But it verifies it in a specific way. It's not a comprehensive verification on our data. Yeah, it checks the type, not necessarily the value. In some cases, the type checking is more to make sure that we have a value, not necessarily the value. Type and value, I guess the type of the value, but not the actual value itself, which is probably what you're trying to say. Yes, so this is a good explanation. So type checking is a way to make sure that data passed in as props is the correct type. So if we have an application where we're trying to pass a string down as props, and we accidentally pass down an object, then that would cause some problems in our code, right? So type checking is a way to make sure that the data that we're passing down is the correct type, and will help us catch errors during development, rather than having a user run into an error and we have to try and recreate the bug that they found and fix it from there. So helps us keep bugs out of production. We want to find as many of these errors as we can during development, and that's exactly what type checking is for. Yeah, just coerce everything. Let's see. Yep, checks the kind of data we get. Or NumPy, not sure. I don't know much about Python, and I don't know what flatten is. Sorry. So possibly, like flatten in Python, we'll have to take Kai's word for it. Okay, so let's do this. Let's take a look at what type checking is. I'm going to pull up the docs right here. So type checking with prop types. There are a few systems that we can use for type checking. Prop types is probably the most popular, although I think we talk about it here. So TypeScript and Flow are other systems that we can use for type checking. As it says, they're wildly gaining in popularity, but they aren't necessary for type checking. We can do type checking without adding a whole new language or a whole new system into our code, and that is with prop types. So let's take a look at what prop types is. If we take a look at this, we see that we have a class component being built here. We're importing prop types from the prop types library. So we have to, looks like we've got a new dependency that we have to install. And then we're going to import the prop types object from that library. We build a component. Prop types doesn't have anything to do, we don't do anything inside our component with our prop types. Instead, once we have defined our component, then we are given this prop types property on that component. Whether it's a functional component or class component, all React components have a property called prop types. And if you set the value of your component.proptypes to this object, you have now started type checking the props that are coming into this component. So let's take a look at this component. We've got component greeting that looks like it's receiving a prop called name. And I'm going to assume that it's a string, but I don't have to assume because I can just look down here. So we've got a prop coming into greeting. So on our prop types, we're going to, in this object, we're going to take every prop that comes into greeting, and we're going to make that prop a property on prop types. That sentence gets really funny. Make that prop a property on prop types. Yeah, props and all the things. So we make it a property on this object here, and then we tell our component what type, what JavaScript type that this prop is going to be. So in this case, name is going to be a string. So let's take a look at the different kinds of prop types that we can have inside, we can use inside React. So we've got all the specific JavaScript types. We've got array. We could do prop types.boolean, .function, number, object, string, symbol, etc. So beyond that, those are kind of the main JavaScript types we have, right? Beyond that, we have a node. We can pass down a full JSX node as a prop. So if we do that, we can tell our component that we are passing down a node. We can pass down an element, a React element. We could even declare that a prop is an instance of a class. So you can pass down a class as a prop, and you would use this syntax here to say, here's my class that I created. Like if we wanted to pass greeting down as a prop, we could do that, and we would just put greeting inside here. Prop types instance of greeting. So let's take a look at this inside a sandbox. We're going to look at one that we've done. Yeah, let's go with this one here. I'm going to fork this, and I will share this here. Okay, perfect. So here's our index.js. We have our character list and our character form. Our list is taking down, or taking a list of characters, a list of objects as a prop, right? So we've got an array, and we've got all of these objects inside our array. So if we wanted to type check character list to make sure that props were coming down correctly, we would go into character list, and below here we would say character list dot prop types equals an object. But don't forget we have to import prop types from the prop types library, which means we need to add prop types as a dependency. So we're going to add our dependency, prop types. There we go. And then import prop types from prop types. Cool, so now we're set up to type check our component. I'll give you just a minute to catch up if you wanted to follow along. So add the library as a dependency, prop-types, import the prop types object from that library, and then set up your object down here. Okay, so we've got our prop types imported. Now we're going to look at what this component is receiving as props, and we're going to create a list of all the props that character list is receiving. There's a couple ways to do this. One way is to open it up into your browser and inspect it with the React tools. And so character list, if we click on character list, we see that we're receiving just one prop, and that is this characters array. The other way to look at this, which won't be, well, I guess they'll both be pretty comprehensive, is to look at where you are rendering your component, and then look at what props have been passed down. So for character list, we're just passing down characters. All right, so we're going to tell character list, we're going to tell this component that props.characters is supposed to be an array. We're going to use the prop types object that we imported, and we're going to say dot array. So we save that, and we check our console. And if we refresh the page, let's see if we've got any errors. Okay, cool, no errors. That means that that component is receiving the correct props. So let's take a second to break this and cause an error so that we can start to recognize what those errors are, and you'll know how to fix whatever's happening. So let's say we thought that this was going to be an object. So if you meant for props.characters to be an object, then you would add that to the prop types, you would open up your app, and you'd see this error right here. Let's zoom in on this. So if you see this error, something like invalid prop, something of type something supplied to your component, then you know that you have a prop type error. That whatever you defined here for your prop is not how it's coming down as in the props object to this component. So let's look at this, and we'll read through this error, kind of decipher what it's saying. So, oh, by the way, this is not an actual error. This won't break your project. You can see everything works just fine here. This is just a warning. It's not a JavaScript error that would break the page and stop your app from working. Okay, so we see that we have a failed prop type. So this warning is telling us that we have an invalid prop called characters of type array supplied to character list. So character list is the component that is receiving the wrong prop type, and what it is receiving is an array where it expected an object. So character list is receiving an array on props.characters, but it expected an object. That's a little hard to see when I highlight it. So the wording here is a little weird, but once you get used to it, once you see this over and over again, you kind of get used to what it's saying. So basically what it's saying is props.characters was given an array inside character list, and it's supposed to be an object. It's supposed to be an object because that's what we put here. So then once you see that, you come down and you have to determine if you really wanted an object, if you wanted an array instead. If you do want an object, you have to go into where you're passing down the prop and figure out why this is an array and not an object. And that will start your debugging process to make sure you don't have any bad errors when you push this, any bad bugs when you push this to production. So we're going to change that back to an array. All right, there's one thing I want to talk about that another reason that we use prop types. Yes, we use prop type for type checking so that we can stop errors before they get pushed to production. And this is a really great way to do that. Systems like Flow and TypeScript are great systems to help with that as well. What's cool about something with Flow and TypeScript that you don't get with prop types is auto completion in your code editor. So if you're using Flow or you're using TypeScript, then your editor can map variables across different files, and it knows that characters is an array, and well, let's say characters was an object and had a dot name on it. Well, we won't get into, because it will do that without TypeScript. But bad example, sorry. But it does help you autocomplete and know your editor knows if you're using TypeScript or Flow what's supposed to be in this file and can autocomplete a lot better, which also saves you a lot of saves you from a lot of problems, basically from human error problems that you might have. So that's one big plus of type systems. What I really like about prop types is it's a way to document what character list is. So we've built out a component. Let's go into, this might be easier to explain in character form. So let's go into character form and let's import prop types from prop types. Okay, if I was to just come in as a developer after someone built this form, it might take me a minute or two to look at the JSX here and determine what's on props and what I need. So if I want to use character form somewhere else in this application, I have to come in here and I have to look at all the props that I have to pass down. So we've got add character, we've got input text, We've got handle change, input text 2, handle change. So already I can see there's 1, 2, 3, 4 props inside this that I need to pass down to this component. Well, I'll tell you right now, this is a pretty light and small component, which is good, and you'll build a lot of light and small components, but you'll also build a lot bigger components that take maybe 10 or more props passed down to them. I think the most I've seen is probably above 20 props passed to one component. So if you had 20 props passed to one component, it would be pretty tedious to come here to a component and start looking for what props you need to pass down. So using prop types is a really good way to kind of document what is happening inside your component. So let's go down here, and we'll practice this with just 4 props, and you'll see even with just this few number of props, it's going to make it a lot easier for us to see what's going on. So down below, we do character form.prop types equals an object. And then we're going to take the 4 props that we found here, and we're going to add them to this object. Or we could look at index.js and see the 4 that are being passed down here as well. So we'll do these one at a time. We've got character form. First one that we run into is add character. So we're going to do add character, and this is it's in an on submit, so I'm going to assume it's a function, and we can double check that. Add character. This dot add character is indeed a function. So we're going to go back to our prop types object and say prop types dot func. Then we're going to add our next one. So look at the next instance of props. We have input text, which being a value on an input, I know is going to be a string. Okay, good. Then we have on change, props.handle change. This one is also going to be a function. Then the last one is input text 2. So both input text props are strings, and then we have 2 functions that's being passed down to here. So go ahead and catch up to this point, and then we'll talk about how this helps us as developers see what's going on inside this component. All right, so now we've got a form component that someone else on your dev team has built, and you know that you need to use that form component somewhere in your application. So you come to characterform.js, and you immediately go down to characterform.prop types to see what props you need to pass down to character form. And so when you do something like this somewhere else in your application, when you render character form where you need to render it in a new place, you know exactly what needs to be passed down, and you know exactly what type of data needs to be passed down to each prop type. So when you get into a component with 7 or 8 or even 12, 15 props, this starts to really come in handy for you to see what you need to pass down to each component. Now, there's certain components that we may not necessarily use in each instance of in every component instance, and there are some props that need to be used and need to be passed down for your component to work. For example, these functions are probably required for our component to work, right? So there's a way for us now to document that add character and handle change are both required props. And that's simply to add .is required to both of those. Now, if we use character form and we don't pass down add character, then we're going to get an error in our application. So let's take a look at that. So go ahead and add is required to both functions. Then we're going to go into index.js and we'll just remove add character. And we'll save index.js. So we've removed add character from character form, and on character form we've added the is required to both functions. So let's take a look at the error that we get now as this renders. Or excuse me, not an error, a warning. Okay, so warning, failed prop type. The prop add character is marked as required in character form, but its value is undefined. This can happen in two cases. First, we forget to pass a required prop to character form, which is what's happening here. So, oops, we forgot to pass add character. So then this fix is easy. We just come in and pass down add character. But sometimes you do pass it in, and you forget, but what you're passing in ends up being undefined. So if we took this away and we save this, now there's nothing being, we're passing down the prop, but we're not passing down an actual function, because that function doesn't exist on here. So let's see what happens. Same exact warning. So the prop add character is marked as required in character form, but its value is undefined. Even though we passed it down as a prop right here, like we've added it as a prop where we're rendering character form, the value that's being passed down is undefined. This is nothing. There's no such thing in this class called add character. And so this value gets passed down as undefined. So those are the two cases that you'll see that error. Either you forgot to put it in altogether, or what you're passing down hasn't been defined yet. Now, if we did something like that, and we didn't pass anything down, and we didn't have prop type set up, and we didn't do proper testing, we could literally push this to production if we didn't have prop types without ever knowing that there was an error. But since we have prop types in, we get our lovely warnings, and we know that there's a problem in our application. So yay for prop types. Okay, last thing I want to talk about is that this. So let's save index, everything's saved. So go back to character list, and you'll notice that we are passing in an array. Well, it's good that we've documented what props are coming into character list, but this still isn't super helpful for me as a developer. If I want to use this component somewhere, I don't know what this array even is. Is this supposed to be an array of strings? Is this supposed to be an array of objects? Like, what is this supposed to be? So now I have to go do some detective work to figure out what characters is. But I want a way to make it so I just look at prop types. I know what props are coming in, and I know exactly what everything is made of. All those props are made of. So let's come back here to the docs, and let's see if there's something here that can help us out. Enumeration, we'll talk about enumeration in just a minute. Oh, here we go. So an array of certain types. So it looks like there is something here that prop types has that's going to help us determine what our array is made of. Okay, so looks like we use prop types.arrayof and then just pass in a prop types type to that function. So let's go back to our code sandbox. And instead of just writing array, we want to write array of, and then pass in whatever is making up our array. So if we look at our index.js, if we look at our data, we've got an array of objects. Cool. So let's go tell character list that we're going to pass down an array of objects. Oh, don't put a semicolon there because this is an object. Cool, so now I can come to this and I can say, all right, so I've got an array of objects coming into character list on props.characters. Let's take a look at, let's see if there are any warnings, not getting any warnings, so that looks correct. I'm passing down correct data. I've typed it out correctly, but this still isn't as helpful as it could be because I don't know anything about this object. It could be an empty object. It could be an object with an ID on it. Does it have a name? What does this object have on it? Well, let's go check out the docs. And an object taking on a particular shape. Okay, so this looks interesting. So it looks like if we're passing down an object, we can use the .shape function to tell my component what is going to be on that object. What is the shape of that object? So we're going to use .shape, and it's a function that we're going to pass in an object to this .shape function. And we're going to, everything that's on the object that we're passing down, all the properties on the object we're passing down, we're going to define here inside shape. And we're going to define the shape or the type of all those things. So let's change this. Instead of saying object, we're going to say .shape. We're going to invoke that and pass in an object. Now let's go look at the shape of our data that's coming down to this component. So we've got Disney data is an array of objects that have a prop called character name. Property called character name, not a prop. So we're going to tell character list that characters is an array of objects with this specific shape right here. So character name, and then we get to tell the type of each property here. Cool. So let's take a look at this in the browser, see if we have any warnings coming up. All right, awesome. We are clean. We set this up correctly. What would happen if we change this to a number? Oh, okay, so failed prop type, we get our warning. Invalid prop, characters at 0 dot character name. So this is telling us there's props dot characters is an array, and it looked at the first object in that array, and it said that first object has a property called character name that was passed down as a string, and we expected it to be a number because that's what we defined. So we need to go either to our data and make sure that our data is correct. If our data is correct, then we need to update our prop types definitions. Cool. So we refresh that. No warning. We're good to go. One last thing, and then we'll take a little bit of a break. Let's go to our index and let's add an object to all of these, and we'll say ID 0. Let's see. Oh, this needs a property, so we'll call this. We'll give it a new property called ID, and we'll make that an object. And we'll say, well, let's not say ID. Let's say, what's an object we can give to our characters? We'll call it movie. No, yeah, it doesn't matter. Title, some movie. So we're going to add this to all of our characters. Okay, so we just changed the shape of our data. I'll give you a second to catch up here, and then we will try this out, and we'll update our prop types in character list. You like how I camel case that, even though it's like a string? It's supposed to be a movie title. Oh man. All right. So now we've got an object with two properties. Character name is a string, and movie is an object. So let's go to character list. We've got character name already. So we're going to do movies. Is that what we called it? Movies? Oh, just movie. Movie is an object, but we're not going to just do dot object. If you ever find yourself typing prop types dot object, stop and do prop types dot shape. Give yourself, make it easier for yourself. 2 months down the line when you need to come back into this component and do some code, make it easier for other developers that in the future need to come into here and do some work on this component. Always do dot shape. If you do dot object, it's kind of a cop-out, and it's just being lazy, not wanting to define the shape of an object. So prop types dot object, just kidding, prop types dot shape. Okay, so we've got an object on the movie prop. So if we go back to our index and take a look at the movie property, we've got movie.title. And that is a string. And let's just make sure that we don't have any warnings. Very good. So I wanted to give you this example so you can see that nested data, you can totally work with nested data inside prop types. Finally, let's do one last one. Let's go back to our data here, and let's say we're going to say if this is, we're going to say type. We're going to make this a string, and we're going to call this original. So this is a little bit contrived because we don't really have a good character that's not an original character. We'll add this, and we'll say one of these is, okay, let's do Disney data. We'll say Jack Jack. Technically a Disney character, but he's not an original Disney character like Mickey, Donald, and Goofy. So we'll say this is, what would we call him? What would we call Jack Jack? Newcomer. Perfect. Thank you, Lydia. Newcomer. All right. If we have a property that we know we're only going to have a limited number of values, we can enumerate what those values are. So what I mean by that is, let's look up here, and we can do, you can ensure that your prop is limited to specific values by treating it as an enum. So we're going to use this one of prop type. We're going to pass in an array with the only values that we want to accept. So we've got original and newcomer. You could have a list of 15 values that you could accept. A lot of times you'll just see 2 or 3, but really you could enumerate as many as you want. So let's go to characters list, and now our Disney data object has character name, movie, and type. So we've got character name, movie, and type. So again, this is one of, is how we're going to define this. And then we pass in an array with all the values that we want. So we either have original or we have newcomer. Let's refresh this, and looks like no warnings. So let's change one of our characters, or I'll leave this on here for 1 second. And then we'll change one of our characters to have something outside of these enumerated values, and see what the warning gives us. Okay, let's go into index.js. It's dropped us down now. We've got enough data on here that dropped us down. Let's change this to original gangsta. Now when we open this up, we've got an invalid prop. Our first character has a type, original gangsta, supplied it to our character list, but it expected one of original or newcomer. So it tells us exactly what to expect here. All right, so maybe we don't want, maybe we don't necessarily need a type on here. So let's erase Donald's and Goofy's. You don't have to follow along at this point. I'm just going to go through one more quick thing, then we'll take a break. So we've got, oftentimes you'll get data back from an API where you may be missing a value, or maybe their value comes back as null. This is more likely going to happen, where you may not necessarily have a value for a property on that object. But sometimes it's missing altogether, like in Goofy's case. So if either of those happens, we're just fine right now because we haven't said is required on here. We could say is required. Then we would we would get a warning. It's marked required, but its value is null. But we don't want to do that. We just want to make sure that we get character name and movie. So both of these are required and is required. Okay, so we look at this. We're not getting any warnings because all of our objects have both required properties. Type is not required because we know in the API, in our database, not every character has a type. So we need to make sure that we don't mark that as required in our character list. That's just one, kind of the biggest use case for this is saying, for using is required. Is sometimes you'll get data back that doesn't necessarily have value for all the properties. Now, where you have to be careful is in here, if a non-required property is an object, and you're using that object in your component somewhere, then you're going to run into an error. So real quick, we'll just build this out really fast. We're passing down each character to our character component, right? So I'm going to look at my character shape right here, and I'm just going to copy, and I'm going to come into here, import prop types from prop types. We're going to say character dot lowercase prop types. And we're just going to paste everything into here. So we know that this is receiving props.character. And this is a prop types.shape. And we've already got our entire shape defined right here. Okay, easy peasy. So we just borrowed everything we did in character list because it's already defined. We just borrowed that and put it onto our character component. So this is what I'm talking about. We've got, this is called character on props. We've got props.character on props. If we say that a name is not required, we're going to run into an issue inside this component. The issue will be that if we've got a character that doesn't have a character name, then this is going, well, we need to go one level deeper. So let's say character name is an object, but we don't do the object, we do shape. And the shape looks like this. So we've got first name is a string. So we want to tell our component to look for first name on the character name object. But if first name ends up not being required, so if this is required, if we've got some characters that don't have this first name, or excuse me, okay, back up. If character name is not required, is required. So anytime you're nesting objects and you're using that object in your JSX, then the wrapping object should be required. because if you don't have character name, if character name comes through as undefined, then you're going, this is now past warning. You're going to get a warning for your prop types, but you're also going to get a JavaScript error. Let's refresh this. Shoot, we didn't get an error. We should have gotten an error. But if character name is undefined, oh, it's because we have character names. So let's say Mickey Mouse doesn't have character name because it's not required. Some characters in our database don't have character name. Now our app is broken. We're past warning stage, right? We get the warning. We get the prop type warnings right here. But now we've actually broken our app because we've got an object that's undefined and we're trying to read a property on that object. So if our object is undefined, then we can't read a property first name of undefined, right? It says that right here. Cannot read property first name of undefined. So this is a little bit contrived and probably a little bit confusing. I apologize. The point I'm trying to make is if we first said is required here, then anybody that would come and use this character component would look at this and say, okay, character name is an object that's required, which probably means that I'm using first name somewhere inside my JSX. So I have to make sure that my data has character name. This is a required thing to make this component run. Because if I don't have it, if it's not required, and I don't have character name, it's actually going to break the browser and cause errors for my users. So prop types, woohoo! All the fun things. You can see that prop types are super flexible. It can take any kind of shape of our data. There's even a lot more that you can do with this. You could have a required, is required, you can require things. So there's just a bunch that you can do with prop types for any kind of data that you might be using in your components. And as you can see, they're going to keep us from pushing errors to production. And for any developer that comes into our project or into the code we've worked on and wants to use that component somewhere else, it quickly indexes everything that is going on or being passed down to this component, whether it's required, the type, so it's a lot easier to work with. So prop types. Most companies you get hired with will use them, get used to them. There will probably be a lot of examples in my lessons that don't use prop types just because of the time it takes to add them in. We won't take that time, but you should from now on be using prop types. Cool. Let's take a 10-minute break and we will start our next lesson at 25 after the hour. See if there's anything in here. That got answered. Do you keep passing prop types to each component? For example, if you put prop type specifications on. So some people, that's a good question. You saw how I basically copied and pasted this object in character. Some people will say it's okay now since that is defined here, that right here we could just say prop types.object. Since all of this is defined in a lower component. So that's basically up to your development team that you get hired on, whether or not you have to define all of these things at every single level, or if you just define them at the level that they're used. The question was the reason we're defining the shape of the object in character list. Oh, we did both. Cool. Oh, isn't it? Yeah, kind of talked about that. Yeah, so this is redundant. Some companies want you to do this. Some companies Don't mind it being just at the lowest level that it's being used. That's not what I wanted to click on. Should we use .shape with arrays or only objects? So with arrays, you should use array of. So array of and object, or not object of, array of and shape should always be used in place of .object and .array, unless your team is okay with defining stuff at lower levels. So good questions, good questions. Yes, this is absolutely right. Kind of like built-in documentation shows it's a good way to quickly show your dev team what your component is expecting on prompts. Absolutely. Okay, now let's take a 10-minute break, and we will start our next class at 27 after the hour. I'm going to end this Zoom, and I'll drop another one when we're about to start. So we'll see you guys in a little bit.